So what we're going to talk about today is an aspect of Kung Fu cinema that's not really discussed or talked about much. And that's namely the cultural impact of martial arts cinema and the musical revolutions that went on to form a lot of very important musical cultures.
You mustn't waste your talents on a petty brawl, petty brawl.
Kung Fu films were pretty much spat at by critics. You had, probably back in the 70s and 80s, critics like the Evening Standard's Alexander Walker, who pretty much treated these films like dirt. And even dear old Barry Norman on BBC TV, if I can recall, he reviewed Jackie's Battle Creek Brawl and he said that martial arts cinema stories were for morons. These were critics that certainly didn't have any kind of street level understanding, let alone a proper cultural understanding of cinema at the time. Now we have commentators and we have experts who have very much kept martial arts cinema alive throughout the decades, and I'm talking about figures like Toby Russell and Rick Baker, who've done a lot for the scene just through pure love. But we also have a fan base who created this scene, who are unheard of. So outside Asia, where did these films flourish and create that cultural fuse? Well, the answer is very simple: the street and the working class, blue-collar, indigenous communities who dwelled within it. And we're not just sort of talking about urbanised environments here, we're talking about the shanty towns of Jamaica and Africa. One very, very important facet of the early Kung Fu film was definitely that of oppression. These movies spoke to those individuals who lived in these kind of circumstances. So the oppression, authoritarianism, and all these kind of facets and these punitive lives that these communities lived very much related to the early martial arts cinema template. So one of the most popular narratives, of course, is the Japanese suppression over a Chinese Kung Fu school. This is a very well told kind of narrative story arc in martial arts cinema. However, some films would become much more deep-rooted in regards to the Japanese attitude towards the Chinese. It was these kind of narrative traits that these communities very much related to and latched onto. So we can safely say this is a cinema for the victimised and the marginalised and the culturally rich audiences out there who lived on the street.
Scram! Don't you wash it?
But sir, Brother Ma and me, we wash all the carts around this area here.
So how will these films find their way over to Jamaica? Well, basically they're imported from Cape Town in South Africa. It wasn't just martial art films that were being distributed, but also spaghetti westerns. The two were, often distributed all at the same time, because as you're probably aware out there, spaghetti westerns were just as popular and influential as martial art films. So obviously, who got to see these films? Well, of course, again, the denizens of Kingston, Jamaica, and the shanty towns, but also a lot of musicians, a lot of reggae musicians. So anyone that's seen the 1973 released crime musical, The Harder They Come, will understand firsthand the reaction these films had on the audiences. There's an incredible scene of Cliff's soon-to-be turned anti-hero Ivan watching Django with his brethren. It's the first seed that he gets to become a gun-toting rude boy. Equally, martial arts cinema filtered through those shantytown cinema screenings with reggae artists. I'm going to pick a reggae artist here who recently passed away and is one of the greats, and I'm talking about the wonderful, much missed already, Lee Scratch Perry. He was a producer and a musician way, way, way ahead of the curve. But above all, he was a huge film fan. So we're just going to take a quick look at some seminal albums that he did. But before we do that, let's just take a little look at some of those other reggae artists who appropriated the martial arts cinema, and also the spaghetti westerns too, in regards to their monikers and their tracks. We have Dillinger, one of the first reggae icons to embrace punk, who was known as Fernando Sancho. Of course, to fans well known to the genre, is one of the greatest spaghetti western villains of the genre. We have Trinity, who took his name from the popular Bud Spencer and Terence Hill films. Big Youth, another punky reggae icon who was one of the artists to initially speak with Bob Marley and start to influence him about the punk movement, who created many tracks created from the martial arts cinema, particularly a really good cut he did called Hapkido, based on the Angela Mal Golden Harvest movie. We have Augustus Pablo, the king of the melodica, and his incredible dub called The Bells of Death, which is based on the 1968 Shaw Brothers film of the same name. And we have Barrington Levy's Shaolin Temple, based on the famous Shaw Brothers Chanchea film of the same name. There was a beautiful vocal version and a beautiful dub of that tune. Really, really spiritual lyrics about taking Jah into the Shaolin Temple and creating spiritual enlightenment between the two coming together. A great track, and one I obviously wholeheartedly recommend. Fantastic on a sound system. And we have the great Prince Jammy, who did a very famous dub album called Kamikaze Dub, which utilised artwork from the Bruce Lee film The Big Boss. Great album, great dub production. But we also had reggae cuts where we had no name checks, but the music was very much influenced by the soundtracks to the films. One very famous 12-inch cut that comes to mind is the 1976 dub cut Ijaman Levi, I Am a Levi, which is a fantastic record. They've taken that famous Quincy Jones sample that was used for the film. What they've done is they've reappropriated it, they've not sort of actually sampled it. Now that dub in particular had a massive impact on club culture, particularly the rave reggae sound systems that were emanating at the time in the 80s. For instance, that cut was regularly played out by a collective in Bristol known as the Wild Bunch at the time. And what did the Wild Bunch become? Well, of course, they went on to become the very famous and worldwide known Massive Attack. However, it was two 1975 Lee Perry productions, I believe, that really set the template for a really deep connection between reggae dub and the Kung Fu film. And this would be the LP Kung Fu Meets the Dragon from 1975. So you've got all those variations going on in the album, with obviously with great titles. There's titles on the album like, for instance, Black Belt Jones and Enter the Dragon. And obviously the love of the films and the Kung Fu particularly really filtered through the studio and the productions. Particularly pertinent to the album is the incredible artwork, which features a track-suited Perry doing a Kung Fu kick. Meanwhile, in the background, you have two dragons. One has the head of Bruce Lee, and one has the head of John Saxon coiling around in the background. It's very striking. And then the other release was also recorded the same year, and it was recorded actually in the same sessions, but it came out as a 7-inch dub plate called Enter the Dragon on the A side and Exit the Dragon on the flip side. Now this is a fantastic dub. At the beginning there's a marvellous freeform toast from Perry where he's introducing Bruce Lee and John Saxon to the reggae table. According to Perry and the back notes of the album has been created specifically for you to practice Kung Fu moves to the music, which I think is absolutely unique. Perry went on to do sort of many other productions. We have Iron Fist, which is based on the movie, again, King Boxer, very influential. And it's based on the style, the Iron Fist style that the film showcases. credited to the Upsetters. And we also have the Upsetters and Tommy McCook, Iron Claws, and that's based on the 1978 Taiwan shot independent called Shaolin Iron Claws. Now, one of the main distributors of these films in inner cities and London was the legendary Umit and Son Emporium in Hackney. Umit would distribute the prints all over the north, south and east London axis. Now the way he would do this was he would juggle the prints. So he'd have a single print, he would travel to and fro the cinemas and he'd show the same print on the same night at different venues. Remember, these cinemas were showing the movies in double and sometimes triple bills. So by the time one was finished, Umit had time to get the print and to zip over to the other cinema, wherever he was going, to show the other print, to maximise, obviously, renting the prints out. So there were many sort of classic venues in the London venues that were showcasing these films back in the day. However, it was the Mile End Coronet, now the Genesis Cinema, in East London's Mile End, that has a particular legendary historical significance. So there's a slew of old school kung fu films shown at this cinema. I remember those screenings being pretty wild and pretty off the hook. And what was interesting was that you went to the venue and DIY flyers were given out, Xeroxed flyers, very punk rock for the next showings. And it was always like, don't be late, make it a date. That was what they always used to say for the next upcoming double bills. Now, from a musical standpoint, this was significant too. All these sound systems would be playing regularly on the circuits also when the kung fu films were showing. So you'd come out and they'd be handing out the flyers and there'd be a jam around the corner. So again, we're seeing this filmic and this musical influence clash together. So I would say the most famous martial arts film of the time, aside from Enter the Dragon, would be King Boxer. There are two scenes which the movie is particularly famous for. The first is when the character of Chi Hao, played by Lolia, has his hands crushed by the rival Skull against a tree. Of course, that scene was heavily indebted to Sergio Corbucci's Django from 1966. And of course, the other scene that's become very iconic is the famous scene of the Iron Fist being utilised by Hao when the camera pans in on him and his hands burn luminous red. The musical sample that is implanted in that scene, which is a very, very famous micro sample of the wailing Moog siren from Quincy Jones's theme from Ironside, which was in fact created by the electronic musician Paul Beaver. So fired by the film's kind of like ghettoized agenda, funk musicians were the first to sort of pick the template and start to musically appropriate the film's imagery. And the title, the first being the big Bunny Sigler 1973 hit Five Fingers of Death, which has an amazing low slung breakbeat on top of a magnificent call and response vocalised mantra. The record was a massive hit on the inner city club circuit. Sigler followed it up in 1976 with the incredible Super Dragon 7 under the Super Dragons moniker, which again took that record's template and ran with it. The same kind of vocalised mantras and that same low slung breakbeat with wonderful orchestrations, sounding something like an echo chamber coming out at the forefront of the record. And that was another massive hit. I believe that record was influenced by the Ron Van Cleef 1974 Kung Fu Inner City hit Super Dragons, which was reissued as The Black Dragon. So many disco funk records flooded out after the Sigler hit. We have the Giorgio Moroder and Roberto Kelly 1974 disco funk bomb, Kung Fu's Back Again. And on a more underground note, we have the great soul and funk vocalist Charles Brimmer and his awesome New Orleans cut Kung Fu Man Parts 1 and 2. So over in the UK, we had our own huge disco funk hit, which was the great Carl Douglas and the Kung Fu Fighting single, which was a massive hit, produced by the great Indian producer Biddu, and with string section orchestrated by Status Quo engineer Pip Williams. So you've got a very kind of cross-generic production team behind the record. Douglas followed up with another hit taken off the Kung Fu Fighter LP called Dance the Kung Fu. Another massive success for the Douglas and Biddu partnership. Filtering down from the same DNA roots as funk and soul in the early 70s, rap music took the tough musicality and that kind of awe-inspiring iconography and just ran with it. What is particularly significant about rap and hip-hop, it's not just about what the rappers are rapping about and name-checking, it's also about the musicality, because those early 1970s martial art films, particularly those of Shaw Brothers, were the first to create the musical sample. We can look to the great, underappreciated, little known, never discussed Shaw Brothers musical supervisor, Yung Yu Chen, as very much a progenitor of this technique. His work on some of the early Shaw Brothers movies totally ahead of their time in the way that they are crudely chopped, cut and sampled. Everything was done off tapes, everything was done and everything was put together literally with scissor and tape, reel to reel, literally. Chen is actually the actor, stuntman, choreographer and producer Frankie Chan. People will know Frankie Chan very well for being a major collaborator with the magnificent Sammo Hung. Chen came into Shaw Brothers at an early age and he straight away worked on those classic David Chang, Ti Lung and Chan Chaya Iron Triangle films. So at that time, Shaw Brothers couldn't really afford composers, so they were reappropriating other musicians' music. They were cut, chopped, screwed, generally fucked about with, to create, in a lot of aspects, a different soundtrack. I like to call it a musical soundbite, The Man of Iron from 1972, starring Mr. Shaw Brothers, Chen Kon Tai. Now, the main theme to this film is actually a CSS track. He's taken what is basically a spoken word piece, a concept piece with spoken word dialogue, ditched all the spoken dialogue, taken the breaks and the funk loops, meshed them together. What is also interesting is that the way he does it is that he cuts too short. Totally hip hop. You get a split second where the track stops, it just kicks right back in. It's total rap. We have a ready to go hip hop instrumental, tough, gritty, ghetto. Big influence on the great Hank Shockley, Public Enemy's DJ and turntablist. Shockley is known as the first hip-hop sonic pioneer of the rap genre. He kind of ditched a lot of the kind of more soulful samples and he went much more for a heavy sonic stew, multi-tracking all his tracks. Looking at the old school Kung Fu films, you can see where Shockley's taken it and he's been listening to those multi-layers and you can just see and hear that within the tracks. Look at Rebel Without a Pause. If that's not a rework of the Paul Beaver Moog Siren from the Quincy Jones track, then please educate me. So the iconic sample found its way onto the G-Funk West Coast rap scene. Take a look at Tupac's 1993 hit Guess Who's Back, which totally samples that wailing siren from The King Boxer. Even kind of today, the sample's still being used. Look at the 2014 rap track by Future, Fuck Up Some Commas. What's interesting about that also is that they say, the producers and the rap artists say themselves, we didn't find out about this piece of music on Spotify or some streaming. They watched the movies. I think they first saw Kill Bill and then they checked out King Boxer. It's great to see that there are young artists out there that go back to the old school. However, when it comes to Kung Fu cinema and rap music, there is only one name that is synonymous with the genre and the musical genre of hip-hop, and that is, of course, the Wu-Tang Clan. The rap collective was born out of the 42nd Street Kung Fu explosion of the 80s. To great effect, a distribution company called World Northal was distributing a large percentage of the Shaw Brothers films on the 42nd Strip. We had films like Lau Kar Lung's classic Dirty Ho. We had Lo Lia's masterpiece, The Fist of the White Lotus. And of course we had the legendary Chan Chaya's The Five Deadly Venoms. These movies influenced three cousins, Robert Diggs, known as the RZA, Gary Grice, known as the Jizza, and Russell Jones, known as the amazing old dirty bastard. There was something magical and spiritual within the movies and the outrageousness of the Shaw Brothers template, which went on obviously to influence the Wu-Tang Clan. However, it's in 1992 that the wheels were really set in motion for the Wu-Tang Clan when they were formed by Diggs. The formation is quite an interesting one. It's one of redemption, very much. Diggs was facing an 8-year charge for murder. And luckily, he was excused. He did not have that jail sentence. Now, this experience changed Diggs a lot, and he had to look at his life and really re-review everything that he'd done before. The seeds of the Wu-Tang Clan were born. However, there is a filmic link also alongside that life choice. The name of the Wu-Tang Clan is based on the film Shaolin and Wu-Tang, a 1983 production starring Gordon Liu and the great Adam Chen. The character of Chen, he's a Wu-Tang sword specialist, spends a portion of the film in jail. And whilst he's in jail, he has a transformation of looking at himself and reinventing himself into having a form of spiritual reawakening. Their first hit was 1993's Protect Your Neck. Martial arts samples and martial arts iconography all the way, very much a freestyle rap. The album totally influenced by the legendary 1978 Shaw Brothers production, The 36 Chambers of Shaolin. What's interesting about the movie, and different and very much for its time risk-taking, is Lung gets rid of all the hatred that spawned the Kung Fu genre, particularly in the early 80s. The revenge and the hatred. That seems to be all put one aside. This film is about spiritual reawakening. He spends most of the running time is spent on Santei training program. Very bold move for a martial arts film of the time. It's actually made up of each chamber that the character has to go through, and each chamber that changes him. And when he comes out of the 35th chamber, he's a completely different individual than the one who came into the Shaolin Temple. So it's this narrative of conversion and redemption that RZA applied from the film to turn himself around and create a musical empire and an artistic empire. Yeah, RZA is now a pioneering producer. He was the first producer to use the chopped, sampled technique. He's also successful in film, directing the underappreciated 2012 Shaw Brothers homage, The Man with the Iron Fists. I find that astonishing, that a film can influence somebody to that degree that they can go on to such success. And I'm not talking about just business success, you know, spiritual success, turning yourself around. That's the real power of these films. taking the template of the film, the 35 chambers, and applying it to his own life model. He was seeing every new release and every endeavour that he would do as a chamber, and then he would move on to the next chamber, the next goal, the next accomplishment. It goes way beyond the Kung Fu cinema as being genre entertainment.
Center, this phase here usually needs 2 years. You must pass it, or you'll never go any higher.
So let's go over to the UK and let's look at some of the kind of the rap and also the rap rave club orientated artists that were influenced by Kung Fu cinema and actually went on to great cultural significance themselves. So I'm going to start with a duo that's not particularly well remembered, but I believe is very, very important in the history of raves and clubbing, and that is Shut Up and Dance. So Philip P.J. Johnson and Carlton Smiley Hyman were at the forefront of the East London rave scene that was originated in a legendary venue called Dungeons on Leighton's Lea Bridge Road, the birthplace of the underground raves. So the duo were veterans of the reggae sound system scene and, of course, the burgeoning club scene, but they were also massive Kung Fu fans. And that iconography was very much taken into their image and the music that they put together, which was kind of like a DIY punk, rave, reggae, rap sound. Their first record, 1989's 5678, was a massive Pirates radio smash. However, it was their first album, 1990's Dance to the Police Come, that really cemented their success. Now, the album has a fantastic cover. However, for me, the dawn of kind of like the rave sound system scene, particularly the scene where Kung Fu was implanted into the music, is the great J. Jonathan Soul Kane and his moniker Depth Charge. Now, the Depth Charge moniker that J. Soul Kane performed under was a massive influence on the 90s breakbeat rave scene that followed. And Jonathan is a massive fan of genre cinema. Horror, spaghetti westerns, action pictures is very much his thing. However, the real obsession is martial arts cinema, particularly Shaw Brothers films. For his first Depth Charge record, 1988's Hando Jin, was a massive smash on the scene. It basically revolved around some incredible martial arts dialogue and a nasty sub-bass woofer crashing bassline sound and scattering slowed down breakbeats. It's like a sound no one had heard before. So the double 1994 LP set, The Five Deadly Venoms, is a particular high point for the Depth Charge history. It features stunning artwork, has the Depth Charge logo reappropriated as the Shaw Brothers shield. Also features the great martial arts star Tan Tao Liam, known to fans as Flashlegs Tan on the cover in a great kicking pose. And the record itself features some monstrous cuts. There's a reappropriated cut again of the smash hit on the underground circuit Hando Jin. We have Shaolin Buddha Finger and my favourite, The Bastard Swordsman, based upon the famous 1983 Norman Chu Silken Web Kung Fu film of the same name. J. Soul Kane was also interested in putting out the films themselves, so it's not only just the music, he was endemic in putting out a lot of classic Shaw Brothers films in beautiful widescreen prints. Before the DVD boom, he helped set up the legendary Made in Hong Kong label that released classic Shaw Brothers pictures such as The Five Deadly Venoms, Mad, Monkey Kung Fu and My Young Auntie.
Don't drop your head. Stand up. Now keep your head quite firmly upright,
Let's just take a quick look at some of the famous Shaw Brothers musical set pieces. Of course, we've got to look at the King Boxer because that's just got some crackers in it. First of all, we've got the incredible main theme, bookended by that famous Moog siren from Quincy Jones's The Theme from Ironside. Wonderful animated title sequence from Shaw Brothers, a speciality, especially in the early days of the company. But we can also look at how Yung Yu Chen appropriates that micro sample in kind of really intuitive ways. I love the way that you first see the character of Chi Hao first utilise the brutal Iron Fist at the martial arts tournament that he's fighting in, and the way that Chen on point brings that sample right in as his hands start to glow red. And there's another wonderful scene towards the end of the film when Hao is taking on James Nam's samurai sword expert. A fantastically choreographed scene, but wonderful when the camera pans in on those red burning hands. And what's very nice is that obviously this fight is set during the night time, so that glowing red is really resonant. And again, Yung Yu Chen straight in on that micro sample. Isn't it strange? It's something that's literally merely a second long, a few brief seconds, can be so iconic. I'm going to take a look at the Five Venoms. Absolute classic martial arts picture. On this movie, those kind of action-packed action kind of cues and animation is dropped for a far more somber title sequence. And what we have here is Chen utilising music as sound design. There are musical creaks, and there are kind of like odd little squeaking violin sounds when doors are opened to different chambers. And I love the way that Chen appropriates the DeWolf catalogue for those kind of sound effects. We have the DeWolf album from 1976, A Rose for Dracula, by the French ensemble, and this cue is called Complaint, that's been utilised into the scene. And we have Drama Sting number 3 by Peter Knight, used for the Strange Location LP on DeWolf. Interestingly, this cue has been used before for the 1968 Boris Karloff horror film The Curse of the Crimson Altar. And we have the strange drone effects of Planète Noire by the great Pierre Avray. Now, the Avray track again is reappropriated for the scenes when we are first introduced to the Five Venoms themselves, and their each particular style, a different lighting gel for each scene, and each character has their own kabuki style mask with the reptile that they represent on the top of the mask. It's a great scene. Alongside that wonderful clanging drone effects that Chen utilises. And let's look at the incredible title sequence from the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, a classic martial arts film. Now, we have a great way that this begins. We have a wonderful flash of lightning, and then we have this wonderful shot of Sante, played by the great Gordon Liu, in an amazing Hung Gar Southern Shaolin stance, wearing the Hung Gar iron rings, a technique used for balance and posture and strength in the arms. So first of all, Chen utilises a few very, very subtle wind effects on the soundtrack before kicking right in to the DeWolf cue. Shaw Brothers were obsessed with brass sounding soundtracks. It gave some pride and some sort of proud heritage to Chinese music. This is where the DeWolf music came in most effectively. So not only is it an exciting cue, it also harks back to kind of Chinese olden times, also in those kind of brass upfront compositions. The track just kicks right off in the second training scene, where we see Sante brandishing a Shaolin pole underneath a studio set waterfall. We then cut to Sante again underneath the waterfall, utilising his Hungar hand skills underneath the water to build the strength of his arms up. Now you may notice as you're listening to the soundtrack, the sound of the water hitting the arms is very, very upfront in the mix. And what Chen has done, he has lifted the volume to the cue even further, so it's even more bombarding the viewer. It's fantastic. It's a real audio-visual smasher. Just he's going to have that music up front, and he's not going to allow those sound effects to usurp the music and the power. Next we cut to the final part of the main title sequence, all shot within the Shaw studio, of course. He's brandishing a Shaolin spade. Meanwhile, Chen decided to even pump the soundtrack up even more. The soundtrack has reached an apex with the rhythms and the brass coming up full frontal, really showing that Shaolin pride there. To counteract this traditionalism, we'll quickly look at the 1979 production Dirty Ho by Lau Ka-lung. This one's fantastic. This again features Gordon Liu cutting some magnificent shapes in regards to his character of the prince. It's a great title sequence. It's against a white backdrop this time. He spars with his co-star Wang Yu, and it's very interesting because the cue used is an old kind of 60s De Wolf cut called Counter Spy by the great composer Reg Tilsley. It looks like it should be sort of grafted onto some kind of thriller, but it really works. This is a real kind of like mid-60s cue, but Shaw Brothers still think it's appropriate in kind of like a late 70s kung fu film to use it. I like the way they appropriate really old cues for their martial art pictures, but it's a wonderful, wonderful main title set piece, and it really sets the film up nicely. So these films, particularly Shaw Brothers films, they have an unyielding power for change, you know, and for rebuilding yourself, be it entrepreneurial, cultural, or even spiritual.
So now, move on and see.